How's it going, everyone? This is Ken from Pixelated Thoughts, and in this video, I'm going to discuss whether or not Astro Bot's success is going to have Sony rethink its strategy about live service titles and single-player games moving forward. Let's discuss. While Astro Bot is a critical success, and I do believe it's on its way to becoming a commercial hit, I don't think it's going to affect Sony's strategy moving forward. And it does not matter how many articles are put out. It doesn't matter how many social media posts are put out. I firmly believe that Sony sees this and says to themselves, see, once again, we have established ourselves as a leader in terms of immersive single-player experiences, and Astro Bot is just another trophy that we can add to our shelf. And look, if Astro Bot ends up becoming the new mascot of PS5 or any PlayStation games moving forward, I think Sony's cool with that. However they can commercialize it or market it, that's what they're going to do. But it's not going to change the fact that Sony is going to attack the live service market. Yes, Concord was an absolute whiff. They know it. You just can't have a game release and then close 14 days afterwards. I'm assuming they're going to retool it and re-release it. But Sony is more than likely looking at Helldivers 2's success as a means of saying to themselves, like, look, Concord may have failed, but we have 2 more opportunities on the horizon, and I really think they're going to emphasize live service games, or at least a push toward it until they actually find a hit. And it's going to be disheartening for a lot of people, because when we see Sony really commit to a single player title, when one of their studios actually puts in that time and effort, we always say to ourselves, this is typical Sony, this is the only thing that they do, this is the only thing they're good at. And even though all of that is true, there's no denying that Sony is really good at putting out single-player experiences. And the thing with Astro Bot is that it was done by a smaller team. They had a smaller, more focused scope, which I really think benefited Astro Bot, because while I do believe the game is really ambitious, it doesn't get too big to the point where we think that the game is just overreaching. They more than likely had a lower budget, and overall, I think they did an excellent job with this game. Like, to me, Astro Bot is one of the best games of the year, primarily because it's immersive in a way that I feel like most PS5 titles, or most titles this generation, have not been. I feel like if you hadn't played Astro Bot's Playroom, when it kind of gave this idea that, hey, the DualSense controller can be used in every game, and then the only thing that gets used in most titles is the speaker, or sometimes we might get some type of gyro controls. But here in Astro Bot, you get to use it for everything. It's a fantastic device, and it really feels like only a handful of developers are utilizing it to its potential. But regardless, I think that Astro Bot is more than likely just something that Sony sees as another hit for them. We did it. We once again hit the, we can do single player titles. And then it's not like they're going to move on. They're clearly going to make this a franchise, because I think this is the 3rd title that Astro Bot has been in. It was the PSVR game, it was Astro Bot's Playroom, and then this game by itself. Team Asobi has a hit on their hands, and I expect Sony to really kind of push them moving forward. But let's say, for the sake of discussion, that Sony turns around and says, look, we like what Astro Bot just did. We believe we're building appropriate hype for the next game. We believe that this is going to be a commercial success. We found a new franchise. Shout out to Team Asobi. Maybe these smaller titles, still AAA, can yield benefits for us. They can be a real positive. I think that we should look at older IPs and think about bringing them back. And that's why my argument for them leveraging PlayStation Plus better. I really feel like when they're re-releasing a game, it feels like a small tease. I was hoping that, when The Legend of Dragoon got a re-release on PlayStation, I was like, okay, well, maybe this game is going to get popular enough for Sony to turn around and say, hey, we are bringing back The Legend of Dragoon. We're going to do a remaster or a remake, because that game is, from the PS1. But I feel like it's a good idea to do that with a number of different IPs. I feel like it's a good idea to do that with Jak and Daxter, with Sly Cooper. experiences that Sony put out on the PlayStation 1 and PlayStation 2 were relatively short. I think they're all like 8 to 15 hours, maybe. There were a couple that were over 20. They're more than likely RPGs. But I really feel like you have a number of really good experiences that are just kind of sitting there that Sony could leverage moving forward. And I'm not saying Team Asobi should be the one to initiate all that, but they could be the ones that could assist in like really innovating some of these older franchises, bringing back Sly Cooper, bringing back Jak and Daxter. It would be interesting to see what Team Asobi could help with and inject and make the game modern. Platformers, in my opinion, are kind of timeless. You really just need to scale well as you're going through the game. For example, I was a really big fan of Sackboy's Adventure. I really like that game. I really feel like most platformers, they do really well when they constantly introduce new things as you're progressing through the game. And I feel like Sackboy did that. I feel like Astro Bot does that. And I think that there's just kind of like this treasure trove of all of these old IPs that Sony has just kind of pushed to the wayside and said, we don't want to go with these games anymore. Like, who doesn't want to see a new SOCOM or a new Infamous? The thing is, I feel like SOCOM, that's the type of game that I think has a brand name that people recognize, that you can capitalize on the nostalgia factor for. Imagine if Firewalk, instead of making Concord, and this is kind of messed up that I say this because I don't want to denigrate anybody's work on a game, but let's say Sony said, hey, we want you to make your own IP, but first, we want to see what your plans would be for a game like SOCOM. And let's say they remade SOCOM, and they did a fantastic job with it, because, you know, outside of SOCOM 4, like, I don't think the one on the PS3 did so hot. I think it was really well received. But I feel like right now, you could totally bring back SOCOM. And I think you could do a really good job with it. And if you're going to do a live service game, in my opinion, it should not cost anything for the player. I think these types of games should be free to play. And I also think that they should be multi-platform. And that's part of the strategy that I think Sony should also adjust to, is that if you're going to make multiplayer titles, make them multi-platform. If there's no single player component, if I'm not having to sit here and play like 8 to 10 hours of a single player campaign, only to invest almost 100 hours into a multiplayer title, you'd probably think that to maximize your profit, you would go ahead and make it multi-platform. That would make sense. And I'm still kind of waiting for Sony to kind of catch on to that. Like, you don't have to say we're trying to protect the integrity of our community. I don't understand why they keep saying that. Just release the damn game for everybody. If you want to keep the single player titles or co-op games, PlayStation exclusives, go ahead and do so. No one's going to complain. But I really feel like Sony should take a look at some of its existing IPs and then make an assessment about whether or not these games would be something people will want to play today. I really do believe like you could dive in and get more platformers out. I mean, I think those are kind of the easiest ones to make in terms of like what you could do. I was not a big fan when initially Jak and Daxter became like this really dark, serious game. I was kind of like, man, we are kind of losing the plot here, because Sly Cooper was always fun and always goofy. And I thought those games were just great to play. Ratchet and Clank. We're not getting another Ratchet and Clank game, I don't think, until like 2029 or something. It was something I saw online. It was really funny. But I really feel like Sony's strategy should shift and adjust to ensure that they're not just ignoring all of these old games that they have. They have way too many IPs that they can pull out and utilize. It's crazy to me. I really feel like you don't have to make these 60-hour experiences. You don't. I think 20 hours and under, perfect. You can always look at the price adjustments or whatever, but Astro Bot's a $60 game instead of these massive $70 experiences that most people don't even complete. I think that people have to look at that as well. I think Sony needs to really look at whether or not people are actually playing these games and then beating them. Because more than likely, they aren't. So if they aren't doing that, then maybe Sony should probably sit there and say, okay, so Astro Bot comes out, high completion rate, high platinum percentage, people really enjoyed it. how about we make an adjustment and have certain studios focus on smaller projects? And if you want to have Naughty Dog and Sucker Punch and all these other massive studios, Sony Santa Monica, make those massive immersive experiences, you can. But they need to kind of take what Nintendo does. And I really want to like push Nintendo right in front of this, because Nintendo has this beautiful strategy. And it's my favorite thing that they do. And what they do is that they have like 1 or 2 major releases a year. And then the next year, they supplant those 2 major releases with like 6 straight exclusives, but they're all smaller experiences. And they did this during like 2020, 2021. And it was really surprising about what we kind of got from Nintendo as you were moving along and saying to yourselves, like, how the hell are they releasing a new game, a new Nintendo Studios game every month? And we're seeing Microsoft and Sony release games like every 3 to 4 years, and there's more than likely multiple delays because the scope just gets larger and larger for these types of games. And I think people have gotten to the point where they're kind of fed up. They know that more than likely these games are going to be worth it in the end, but the wait is just way too long. And I really feel like Sony is not emphasizing that right now, because if you have a strategy like Nintendo's, you are going to constantly have eyes on your console. But I believe that if Sony was going to make any changes toward its strategy, it would have done so by now. Here's what I think is going to happen. I think Sony is going to emphasize that we are going to constantly commit to single player experiences and to tell these stories and to have these pushed out for all their players to enjoy. They know what their base wants. They don't care about the memes or the criticism. That's what they're going to do because they're really good at it. And that's one thing I think we can all agree on. I do believe, however, that if they make changes to that live service approach, it's going to come in the form of pricing. I honestly believe, and I stand by this, that Concord probably would be alive right now if it was on PlayStation Plus. And possibly if it was multi-platform. I think Sony really needs to stop thinking about multiplayer titles as things that need to be attached to one community. They need to push these experiences out to everybody. And if you happen to be a PlayStation Plus subscriber, it's kind of incentive for you that, hey, if you sub, here's Concord. Not just Concord, but they can also do what Ubisoft does with its Ubisoft Plus platform, in which if you have that subscription, you also get the Ultimate Edition, which I think is good incentive because you get all the DLC for free. Sure, I think that would be good incentive to, 1, get more subs on PlayStation Plus, and 2, get more eyes on the game. I think that's how Sony should approach it moving forward. If you want to charge a price for some of these live service titles, $20, I think that would be kind of reasonable. But if you have it on PlayStation Plus, you're practically guaranteed a community. I mentioned in the video for Concord that I had posted that Destruction All-Stars somehow survived for this long. I think there's only like 1 or 2 players playing it though, but it survived. And that kind of shocked me because I don't think Destruction All-Stars was a great game. I think it was okay. I think Concord was better put together, but it just failed. But people are looking at Astro Bot's success right now and saying, look, Sony, why don't we have more games like Astro Bot? Why don't we have smaller games? And I think Sony might make adjustments toward that. But I also believe that you're not going to see that pivot for quite some time, because there's more than likely multiple games that have not been announced yet that are going to be pushed out by these major studios. And I think that's going to be the commitment for those studios moving forward. It kind of sucks that Concrete Genie wasn't a success. I was really hoping that that studio would really do well, so therefore they could be kind of one of those like, hey, this is this AA studio that we have. We're going to have them focus on smaller, more focused experiences. I think Sony really has to think about this. But I also believe that Sony's not going to make any drastic changes, at least not right now. And the reason why I believe that is because they look to their left and they see Nintendo. And they say, Nintendo's our competition, but they have a stranglehold on the handheld market, and they've had one since the Switch released. The Switch 2 is going to come out, and that's more than likely going to become the standard unless they fumble it like the Wii U, which I really think is highly unlikely. Regardless, I really feel like Nintendo is in a market of its own. When I turn to look at Xbox, I say Xbox might be changing its strategy so drastically that they become a third-party publisher. Their focus is on Game Pass. I mean, it went from Xbox Game Pass to Microsoft Game Pass, and now they're looking to put out more Xbox exclusive titles on multiple platforms. So if you're Sony, you're probably feeling really secure. And listen, if Astro Bot does become a commercial success, if it does become this huge hit, then it's just reaffirming Sony's current strategy. And I don't think anything is going to change. I think there's going to be a number of articles analyzing this. I think there are going to be a number of videos analyzing this. But I do believe that Sony right now is in a position where they don't have to do anything drastic. And I think this is how it's going to be for Sony until they completely flop. I really do. I really believe that unless Sony has some drastic failure, and let's maybe say the next 2 to 3 live service games that they put out just completely bomb, and it puts them far behind Nintendo, somehow next to or behind Microsoft, I think Sony right now is not going to make any real changes or adjustments regardless of how good Astro Bot is, because it is a fantastic game, and it's a game that I highly recommend everyone who owns a PS5 pick up and play. It is phenomenal. But I also believe that it's not enough for Sony to turn around and say, we got to change up everything. And while I do agree with the public sentiment that Sony should embrace its older IPs more, I think that's going to come in the form of games being released on PlayStation Plus. I think you're going to see a larger back catalog there, but you're not probably going to see some of these games get remastered or remade because Sony doesn't have the bandwidth to do so. Now, do I believe something like Bloodborne should be remastered? 100%. I think Bloodborne is one of those games that really deserves it, and I do believe Sony could profit off of that decision. But I think that they're probably going to save an announcement like that for maybe the PS5 Pro or maybe something next year. I don't know. I don't think Sony's in any rush. And maybe that's a problem for the community, but I don't think that Astro Bot's success or any of the single player titles that they have coming out in the near future, that's going to change how they work, because they are pushing that strategy of creating immersive single player experiences. Because Astro Bot is a single player game, and it literally falls under that strategy for Sony. So to Sony's point of view, they're probably saying to themselves, look, it worked. And until the fans really punish Sony for trying to emphasize live service titles, they're going to continue to really push for live service games. You're going to say to yourself that, well, Concord shut down after 2 weeks. But I'm telling you, that's probably not going to stop Sony from trying to make another live service title in the hopes that it's a hit, because if it is, the profits from those titles could absolutely dwarf a single player game. We're not just talking about microtransactions, we're also talking about DLC, seasonal passes, all of that stuff. There's a lot of money in live service, and Sony wants a piece of that pie. They don't just want a piece, by the way. I think they want a stake in the live service market in the same way that Ubisoft currently has. Because Ubisoft's games, for better or worse, are all live service titles. They're all meant to be played for years. They're all meant to be multi-year experiences. And they're meant to get as much money from the consumer as possible. And I think Sony likes that strategy. And I think they want a piece of that pie. And I think Sony is going to remain obsessed with that strategy until something hits. But let me know what you think in the comments, because that is going to do it for this video. If you happen to like the content, please consider sharing, and subscribing. I am Ken from Pixelated Thoughts, and I will talk to you next time.